In this chapter that deals with improvisation, this is called Engineering a Great Solo. We're going to be taking a look at a number of strategies that incorporate phrasing, rhythmic development, motivic development, and lots of different textural ideas that you can add to your soloing that will really take your soloing to the next level. At this point, we've spent a lot of time in this book and through this series of guides developing harmonic ideas and melodic approaches using different vocabulary, different harmonic ideas and substitutions, triad, superimposition, all of these different harmonic attributes. But in this chapter, we're going to be taking a look at some textural possibilities to really take your solo to the next level. I think these textural possibilities, through the use of octaves, block chords, muting, different articulations, will add an extra dimension to your playing and really, make it lifelike and add a lot of character and personality. So we're going to start by taking a look at example 1 by simply playing the C major scale in octaves. Now, lots of jazz guitar players utilize octaves to great effect. Of course, Wes Montgomery and Django Reinhardt both spring to mind, but the use of octaves is a hallmark in jazz guitar. And there are different ways to articulate this. I'm going to play example 1 using my thumb in the style of Wes Montgomery, but of course you could play it using, you can play octaves using pick with a strumming technique, or even a hybrid technique of plucking with the pick and a finger simultaneously. Each one will give a slightly different flavor, but we're going to go ahead and play example 1 with the thumb. Example 2 features the use of octaves in a line executing a 2-5-1 progression, this time in C major 7, but we're basically going to use the same harmonic and melodic techniques that we've looked at in earlier chapters, but we're going to add the textural device of using octaves. Another very colorful texture that we can add to our solos is the use of double stops. Double stops most frequently are used with thirds, sixths, and tenths, which of course are an octave plus a third. In example 3, we're playing through a 2-5-1 progression in B flat major using double stops in thirds, going back and forth between major and minor thirds. And this creates a really nice effect. It almost sounds like two guitars playing lead at the same time or two horns working together in tandem. So take it slowly at first and work out some fingerings that tend to really bring this effect to life and offer smooth movement from one chord to the next. Okay, as we continue to explore different textures that you can use to add some excitement and variety in your solos, example 4 takes a look at using block chords. We've talked about block chords in previous chapters, but essentially what it is taking 4 or more notes and soloing with chord structures. Again, this was a hallmark of Wes Montgomery, Billy Bauer, many other guitar players, Johnny Smith, Kenny Burrell. It's an essential technique to utilize in your soloing. So what we have here in this example is a 2-5-1 progression in the key of G, and essentially we're outlining each chord with a 4-note structure. And over the second chord, the D7 altered, we can utilize a diminished 7th chord to great effect. It creates the sounds of D7 flat 9, and even if you play them in rapid succession, you can create a nice diminished chromatic flavor, which ultimately resolves to the G major 7th chord at the end by way of 2 stacked 4ths chords. So the idea is to come up with a melodic fragment or a solo line and then harmonize that solo line with notes underneath it that fit the chord. So if we were to take a look at the A minor 7 chord, the melodic line on top is, and we can harmonize each one of those melodic notes with a different inversion of an A minor 7th chord. So we have A minor 9, A minor 7, and then an inversion of A minor 7, and then use the diminished chord as a passing chord. And this is something that Wes Montgomery used quite a bit. It's to great effect. So basically we're connecting these two inversions of A minor 7 with a passing diminished seventh chord, harmonizing the D, which is a passing note in between chord tones C and E. And then on top of the D7, we can play a variety of diminished seventh chords. And then resolve that to G6. Example 5 uses the texture of space. This is kind of an underused texture, but it's very important. I mean, if you think about music, music is expressed in both sound and silence, and the use of space and silence within a solo is very important. Of course, people like Jim Hall come to mind, Miles Davis, a lot of players who had very compositional sensibilities. They really understood the value of space. And I think leaving some space in your solos really allows the listener to fill in the blanks, so to speak, with their own imagination, as well as maybe answer some ideas that you would be putting out there as a question. There's this sort of give and take exchange of ideas between you and the listener, whether the listener is a musician in your band or a member of the audience. So space is a very important concept to remember. In example 6, we take a look at the opposite of space, which we can call density. And this is a texture that was really utilized so effectively by John Coltrane, and of course guitarists such as John McLaughlin. McLaughlin was very much influenced by John Coltrane. Alan Holdsworth is another guitar player that was influenced by Coltrane. And a great example of the musical paradoxes of space and density can be found on the Miles Davis recording, Kind of Blue, or any Miles recording that features Miles alongside John Coltrane. You really get this nice contrast between these two textures, both of which are incredibly valid in the context of a solo. In example 7, we take a look at a phrasing strategy. This is just something that I call question and answer. And basically, in classical music, this is often called an antecedent and a consequent. Basically, you have a phrase that starts off, in this case, in example 7, you have this little phrase which we can call the question. And then the answer to that might be just a slight variation on that phrase. Then when we move to the third bar, we can repeat that question or antecedent. And now we're just transposing it up a whole step to C minor, that's the chord. And then we might have a slightly different response to that question. So you notice bars 2 and bars 4 are slightly different. Measure 2, you're ending the phrase with a downward minor third movement. And then in the fourth bar, you're kind of finishing off that phrase. You're adding a period to that phrase by ascending. You're finishing off the phrase by moving up instead of down this time. Now there's a period at the end of that phrase, creating a complete sentence, and then we can move on to another question and answer. Example 8 is also a question and answer type of strategy, moving through a 2-5-1-6 progression. This one really takes intervallic movement into account. We start off with a D minor 7 by ascending in a third, and then finishing that phrase with a third ascending, but immediately answering that on the G7 and the beat 1 of that second measure with a downward moving third. Then we can repeat our initial idea in the third bar by moving up a third with 2 notes that fit over the C major 7 change. And then we can close that phrase out with a variation on our theme that we had, our answer that we had in measure 2, by not only playing a downward third, but offering a little ornamental enclosure around it. So we're starting off and then up again. So we're answering that phrase by moving down. Then we're restating that question over the C major 7, and then we're answering that with a little ornamental enclosure. And that's a nice way to add a little variety in the context of this question and answer phrasing scheme. Example 9 features another textual device that you can use, and that is self-comping. We've taken a look at this technique in previous chapters of this book, but it's a really effective technique. It's another way of creating a dialogue or the illusion of a conversation. In addition to using this phrasing texture of question and answer within a lead line, we can also offer this question and answer dynamic or effect by having the question be a single note line or a single note phrase and then answered by a comp. So that really creates the illusion of two players. Kenny Burrell is a master of this technique. He uses this device all through his incredible recording, Midnight Blue. And if we take a look at example 9, basically here's the question, which is a solo line, and then that's being answered by two little chord jabs. Another single note question, answered by the chord jabs. So in that regard, you can, kind of create a little conversation with yourself. And I think with all of these textures, what's really important about these techniques is that by imposing quote-unquote limitations, they're not really limitations, but by imposing these little concepts or rules, you actually will, come across a whole new batch of ideas. If you feel like you're kind of playing the same ideas over and over again, if you just have free reign over the changes, a lot of times we tend to play the same ideas over and over again and then find ourselves, running into a wall. By imposing these little ideas or limitations or thoughts or concepts, whatever you want to call them, you can actually break some new creative ground and come up with some ideas and licks that you otherwise would not have thought of. Example 10 utilizes a texture that we can call expansion. And that's just basically starting out with a little seed of an idea and gradually expanding that. The easiest way to expand that would just be to lengthen that idea through a scale. So what we have in the first measure over D minor 7 is just a 3-note idea. And then we gradually expand that through the scale in the subsequent measures. So the second measure, we're adding a little syncopation by starting on the offbeat, but we're adding an extra note on there, so now we have a 4-note sequence, followed by a 5-note sequence, and then finally the phrase is ended with a 6-note sequence. So we're gradually expanding this phrase, adding 1 note at a time. In example 11, we take a look at another textual device that you can use that's very effective, and that's the device of repetition. So basically taking one idea and using it over and over and over again, and you can twist it around a little bit, but it's an incredibly effective device. Of course, Sonny Rollins comes to mind when a lot of people think of this device. Sonny could take a full chorus or several choruses just with one seed of an idea and really make incredible music. And one of my favorite guitar players that utilizes this texture to great effect is Jim Hall, and I think that I'm sure he was influenced by the years that he played with Sonny Rollins in developing this very compositional approach using a variety of textures, one of which being repetition to really expand your idea and drive the melodic idea home.